Welcome. My name is Tom Barron. I'm the new PTL as of the Rocky cycle for the Manila project. So we're here today for a project update. There's my contact information there if you want to get a hold of me. So today we'll talk briefly, let me just check here. How many of you have actually used Manila in this room? Okay, we've got one. All right, so we'll briefly talk about what Manila is and the problem space and background for Manila. We'll do an update on the Queen's release, what was done then, API changes, features, driver improvements, stuff like that. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in Rocky and beyond. And I'll try to move right along so that we have a little bit of time for questions. We need to get out of here right on the 20-minute mark, but you can catch me outside as well. So Manila is the control plane in OpenStack for provisioning and managing shared file systems across storage systems. And kind of oversimplification is that as Sender is for block storage, Manila is for file shares. The truth behind that is that Manila forked from the Sender project, and it has a very similar service architecture to Sender. Beyond that, there are a number of important differences in the way it works and handles things. For example, storage is presented to guest VMs, Nova instances in OpenStack by a hypervisor, mediated by the hypervisor, and that's not true for Manila. With Manila, you present shares to consumers over the network directly without hypervisor intervention. And that brings a whole class of problems around access control and security and so on that go with that. The name comes from the association with Manila file folders, not with the city in the Philippines, fine city, but that's not where it comes from. We all have mascots kind of mandated by the foundation, and this is the Manila Zorilla, which has, so far as I know, has nothing to do with storage, but it rhymes, and it's a cute little skunk from Africa. But if we weren't required to use an animal as an icon for us, perhaps something along the line of file folders would have made sense. Manila offers, like other OpenStack services, a consistent, simple REST API for self-service, so users of the cloud can create shares and grant access to them and extend them and delete them and perform all kinds of operations on them themselves. There are about 30 backends now for Manila. Compare that with over 80 for Sender. We're a newer project, but just give you a feel for where we are. Some of them are open source. Some of them are proprietary vendor backends. We support multiple NAS protocols besides NFS and CIFS, and there's CephFS and GlusterFS and HDFS and MapRFS and so on. The Queen's release had about 41 reviewers and 44 unique contributors with 21 companies. So we're healthy. The project's getting more mature. There's less just everybody putting their drivers in, so there's fewer commits right now. But it's healthy and a healthy project with lots of engagement. This is the 7th production quality release. I think the last user survey that I saw was Okada showed about 14% adoption. I know that's going up because I work at Red Hat, and our distribution, we see more people using it. So growth is happening. There's a lot of activity outside Manila proper that's relevant. In our case, we have OOO for Director for Red Hat. Most of my work in the last cycle, for instance, besides kind of maintenance work, is PTL for Manila was over in OOO, getting stuff ready so it could deploy in the real world. I put Gopher Cloud in there twice. Sorry, I'll fix that before we publish the slides. There's work, integrating Manila even outside OpenStack proper, for container workloads and Kubernetes and the like. So what happened in Queens, which was the 7th official release of Manila? First of all, we didn't have a lot of API changes, but the point here, in comparison with previous releases, the point here is that Manila does do microversioning, so it's always backwards compatible. So when we enhance our APIs to put stuff in it, basically you set a header in the REST request, X OpenStack Manila API version, and you get that version of the API back. So if you want to be backwards compatible, you can pass an older version. The default is 2.0 right now and expected to remain there for quite a while. One of the themes in Queens was that IPv6 gets real. What I mean by that is the IPv6 core infrastructure was added for access lists and exports back in Pike, but we just implemented it for really a reference driver, the LVM driver, which is a nice open source driver for proving that things work, but it's not really a scale out cloud driver. And it doesn't have HA in the data path, for instance, and so on. So I don't consider it a production quality driver. So we implemented it in this cycle support for the NetApp drivers and for the Dell EMC Unity and VNX drivers. As we implemented it, we found bugs. So we needed to fix those that hadn't shown because we hadn't really put the rubber to the road in the previous release. And we added a bunch of scenario tests for it and upstream CI to catch those bugs and stuff going forward. One of those API changes was to get total count in share list APIs. This is a pretty pedestrian feature, but the point is that it came out of real world cloud experience. The Huawei folks are running a great big public cloud. They needed to be able to show their users how many shares they were using and so on. And the only way we could do it before was list them all. And if they had a whole bunch of them, that's a pretty stupid way to do it in the API. So this was a fix. This was this was an API breaking fix because it changed the API. So we did it with a new microversion. We have a method when the service starts up called ensure share, which can be used to reconcile Manila's view of the state of a backend and its actual state. So when service starts up, the backend driver can say, hey, here's what the database says, but guess what? We upgraded our software on the back end, and Manila doesn't know about it. We have some new, some things happen because of that. Or we didn't have IPv6 addresses on earlier, so Manila doesn't know that this share is available at an IPv6 export location, stuff like that. Well, we were doing this kind of reconciliation every time the service started up on every backend, and if you have thousands of shares like on the Huawei public cloud, that took time. So basically, we have a way now to collect the information, send anything that might have changed on the back end as a bunch of key value pairs. Driver can send that up very quickly. The manager computes a hash and says, hey, did anything change? If nothing changed, we just go move right on. So it's a faster startup for that kind of reconciliation. We had two new drivers, the Infinidat and Infinibox, Veritas Access, and a bunch of driver fixes. NetApp fixed a bad bug with share sizes when you create from snapshot. One's more dear to my heart was that we use Ganesha for CephFS backend with an NFS gateway. And that's an example of what an open source end-to-end software-defined solution that I do consider production quality, and part of making it production quality, which is true now, before it was more of also a reference driver is that it have HA in the data path. So we've built HA in the data path on that with OOO deployments at least. I'd love to talk to Cola and Charms people and so on about getting that similar thing for it. But to do that, we need to maintain some state about export. So if we fail over from one node to another, we're not just storing it in local persisted disk, and then lose it when the node goes away. So we're using RADOS to do that. Huawei added revert to snapshot capability. One thing that people who are familiar with snapshots in the block world, there's a difference in Manila with file shares is the different kinds of snapshots. So sometimes some backends have snapshots which are basically just a place to look for old files and old directories and pull them out, which is a very handy thing to have. Others you can use more in like a block-like situation where you can create a new share from a snapshot. Some backends have the capability to revert back to an earlier snapshot, so you can move back in time on the same share. So Huawei added that. QNAP added a bunch of backend capabilities that I've listed there. NetApp added some at-rest encryption, encrypted volume capabilities. The generic driver had a whole bunch of fixes. We did a bunch of community goal type work. Policy and code was an overall thing where you no longer have to maintain separate JSON policy files. If you just want to do the ordinary default thing, you can if you want to change it. We did that. We moved our doc all in tree, which means we maintain it better. So we have a whole lot of doc fixes in that release. We enabled mutable config by Oslo mutable config, which is actually a Rocky goal, but we did that in Queens. We moved the Tempest test plugin to its own repository, which was an overall Tempest goal. Zool migrated to V3, and we did a whole bunch of changes around that. Some of which still need to be, some legacy stuff still needs to be done, but we've made changes compatible with that. In Rocky, one big theme is Python 3 readiness for us. So we've really started working hard on that. We started, earlier than this, but basically the big news for us was, and Debian kind of woke everybody up, they dropped support for Python 2 already. And when they did that, we said, okay, well, we have our unit tests already running with Python 3 and everything. We're cool. And then we realized that our Manila UI plugin, so for Horizon, we have to run a special plugin. And it wasn't at all Python 3 compatible. And it was a nightmare getting that Django code fixed. And Victoria right here did the heroic work of correcting it and getting it to work. So that's been fixed up. We need to add some more gate jobs that run Python 3. And in particular, we have some CentOS jobs there that we need to move to Fedora because CentOS isn't going to support Python 3. So that's a theme that we're doing a bunch of work in Rocky for. It'll probably continue beyond Rocky in terms of getting all the gate jobs and third-party jobs and so on moved over. A nice feature that we've got in here is JSON schema validation of requests. As you can read up there, basically, Manila currently has kind of an ad hoc approach to validating requests as they come in over the REST API. So we're putting in a consistent JSON schema for each resource and a JSON schema object validator. So now all the errors can be caught up front and you can return an HTTP bad request to the user in a consistent fashion, rather than sometimes doing that, sometimes returning other return codes, and sometimes just letting the error go through to the back end and fail out there. So that's a big improvement. From the Huawei public cloud, they had a request to put metadata on access rules. So when users made access rules, they were getting confused with what they were doing and so on. It was basically just a scratch pad. You can make notes. You can use it any way you want. But it makes things much more manageable, improves the user experience while managing access rules. Another thing was added was access rule priority. Originally, Manila only allowed shares to be mounted read-write. Then we added the idea that some of them could be mounted read-only. And then we kind of later realized that we had created a situation where the rules for access were ambiguous. So for example, say we said that a particular /24 had read-write access to a share. And then we say a specific address inside that 24 has read-write access to that share. There are a couple possible interpretations of that. You may say, oh, it obviously means one thing. Some other people will say it obviously means another. Which rule wins? And it turns out different backends were doing different things. So we have an inconsistency there. And the way this is being resolved is that access rules can have priorities. They're going to get a default priority, which is 200, which is the lowest. And you can put, so we could say that the /24 one is priority 1, and the specific one is priority 200. And that would have the effect that the specific one actually is mashed out, which there's a use case for because sometimes people want to do that as part of their change process and so on. Or we can reverse them and the more specific rule would have priority, which to me is the more natural way to do it anyway. Yes, sir?
That really depends on what backend can do, right? I mean, you can define whatever you want in OK, but if backend doesn't have this capability of prioritizing the export rules.
We can give them, we're going to give them the driver can compensate if the backend doesn't have actually. So say the backend only has the capability of doing most specific wins, which is a natural way to build it. Then what you can do is the driver can hide the more specific rule and just pass the more general one in that case. So we're going to have a way to indicate. We had long discussions about this. I actually prefer just the most specific wins solution myself, personally. But that was incompatible with what some of the drivers were already doing. And we needed to have a consistent way to go forward on that. Anyway, this is what we're doing. It's an improvement. May not be perfect, but it does. And it doesn't remove every ambiguity. It leaves it to the user to remove ambiguities, which I don't like, but that's what we're doing. In Rocky and beyond some of our goals, we have Manila never did the work to get involved with the OpenStack SDK, which means we're not in the OpenStack client. And the OpenStack Shade and Ansible modules don't include us and so on. I would really like to address that and get that cleaned up. We're really interested in serving up Manila shares to other consumers than just Nova compute instances, both inside OpenStack and outside OpenStack across clouds. There's going to be a lot of work in that area, I think. I'm really interested in getting more production quality open source software defined backends for Manila. So I think right now we have, in my view, other people will argue with you and that's fine, a lot of opinions on this. We have one right now, which is this FFS backends, CFFS and CFFS CNFS. And that's because they have HA in the data path, which most of the others do not right now. There are other factors as well, their cloud scale. People have developed forks of Manila that have the same kind of characteristics for GlusterFS backend. We're campaigning to try to get that plowed back into the community. I'd love to see others out there. We need to finish up the Python 3 work. We need to get more IPv6 backends, IPv6 capable and ready. We think this FFS stuff basically is and just need to test it. And we'll probably find a couple places we need to fix it up. Others will be coming in this coming releases as well, I'm sure. Cross-project, cross-community work. I want better deployment tool integration. As I mentioned, we've been putting a lot of work into OOO to deploy different backends with Manila and do it in a robust way. Cola's been building. I want to make better contacts with the Cola community. because that's and charms and so on. There's a lot of talk, you may have seen sessions here about running Sender standalone. Manila's capable of running standalone in just the same senses that Sender is, and there are several of those. One is you run a full-blown Manila without the rest of OpenStack, and people are interested in doing that to put them in software-defined storage controllers, or for instance, just to provide storage, all the drivers and backends that are behind Manila to other clouds than OpenStack. And other people are talking, like Gorka Galior has a proposal for SenderLib, which wraps up just the libraries, basically, without the rest of the services. And he can run it in Ansible. He can run it as he's building a CSI driver backend around that. So we can do similar things like that with Manila. So there's a lot of work to do there. I am very interested in backup and DR solutions. And one of my, I'm out of time. Thank you. And that and storage intelligence management, my view is that those ought to be cross-project things and not just specific to, you do it one way for Sender, you do it another way for Manila, and so on. So I have a big interest in that kind of area. So I'm out of time. Come to the feedback, to the forum session to give us feedback today. Also, of course, you can use mailing lists, IRC, et cetera. We really want information and feedback from you. And we have an onboarding session in room 223 at 10 a.m. today. So if you want to contribute to the project, we'd love it. Or if you're just interested in thinking about it, please come along or if you're already contributing, come along and help talk to people about how to contribute. Thank you.